Everybody knows that Pokemon get stronger when you evolve them. It's like a key part of the games. Level up your Pokemon, evolve them, and make them stronger. Except that some Pokemon actually become weaker after they evolve, at least in competitive play. This happens for a few different reasons. The most common one being an item designed to give not fully evolved Pokemon some help against their more complete counterparts, the Eviolite. This item increases a Pokemon's defense and special defense stats by a whopping 50%, with the catch being that the item will do absolutely nothing if it is held by a Pokemon that cannot evolve further. The other items in the game that increase one stat by 50% come with some kind of massive drawback. This item is only remotely balanced because it only works on Pokemon intentionally designed to not have reached their full potential yet. But not every unevolved Pokemon wants to use the Eviolite. Some of them are given signature items that only work in their not fully evolved state. And actually, that's the case for the 10th best not fully evolved Pokemon on our list, Pikachu. Pikachu in the anime, I think, teaches some bad lessons. This stubborn little mouse totally refuses to just eat a Thunderstone and evolve. Not that Game Freak seems to care. They actually keep rewarding it over the years with a signature item, its own Gigantamax form, and most importantly, like 40 stylish hats. Pikachu may seem like it has a permanent Everstone attached because it never wants to evolve, but what keeps the rat relevant in competitive play is a different round stone, Light Ball. Light Ball is an item that does absolutely nothing unless it's held by a Pikachu. Even Raichu and Pichu can't get the ball to turn on, and the benefit it provides is no joke. A Pikachu holding its little stress ball has both its attack and special attack stats doubled. How much does that matter? Well, given that it ends up with more special attack than Mewtwo, I would say at least a little. Of course, it does still have the defensive stats of a Hoppip. Actually, they're 5 points lower than a Hoppip, so Pikachu is a bit of a glass cannon. But in competitive play, massive power just on its own is rarely enough to get a Pokemon usage. Luckily for Pikachu, it has two other qualities that I personally know very well, having used both of them on my world's winning team, albeit on Raichu. The move Fake Out and the ability Lightning Rod. Fake Out stops whatever it hits from moving for the turn, and though it is normally better on Pokemon with a bit more bulk, Pikachu can use it to offer some support for its partners when it's backed into a corner. Lightning Rod offers team-wide support as well. It not only makes Pikachu immune to all electric type moves, but will also draw in any electric type moves targeting Pikachu's partner, and it gives Pikachu a special attack boost whenever it eats the electricity. For teams that rely on electric type attackers, Pikachu's an unusually scary sight. Pikachu flips the usual pre-evo formula on its head. Instead of getting more bulk thanks to Eviolite, it offers more wattage, and that massive attack is the main reason you'd be tempted to make it work, though of course its icon status probably plays a role as well. Over the years, Pikachu has made a few appearances in official tournaments. During Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, I played against a Pikachu in the semifinals of a tournament. It actually one-hit KO'd my Kyogre thanks to the Light Ball doubling its Volt Tackle. During Sun and Moon, another player paired Pikachu with Tapu Koko, who could boost its damage to ridiculous levels with its ability setting up the electric terrain and its attack Discharge hitting both opponents and powering up Pikachu further thanks to Lightning Rod. Sword and Shield gave Pikachu the ability to return to its body positive early roots, getting big and unleashing the most terrifying cry you've ever heard, thanks to its signature Gigantamax form. Gigantamax Pikachu's Gmax Volt Crash had the side effect of paralyzing both of your opponent's Pokemon, including the Pokemon you didn't even damage, combining a bit of that earlier utility with Pikachu's power. Pikachu's best placement when Big Mode came out was top 32 at a regional championship, on a team that greatly appreciated the pseudo speed control that Pika could offer. But even though Game Freak keeps doing their utmost to make the mascot usable, the issue of Pikachu's lacking bulk is still bigger than, well, Gmax Pikachu itself. Even with doubled HP, Pikachu is just far less bulky than most other Pokemon, and that means that it's never won a major event. Not that you need to be bulky in order to win, as our number 9 slot is here to prove. Before Generation 7, there was zero reason to use Haunter. Well, unless you wanted to use both Haunter and Gengar, but I mean, what kind of lunatic would do that? Anyway, the key phrase here is before Generation 7, because when Sun and Moon made their debut, Gengar had one of its best tools ripped away away from it, Levitate. Interestingly, Haunter received no such nerf. This gave Haunter a very small niche as a ghost-type Pokemon with poison coverage and 3 immunities. During the first year of Sun and Moon, Fairy-type Pokemon were running the show. More specifically, Tapu Koko, Tapu Fini, and Tapu Lele. Not you. Also relevant during Sun and Moon's first year, Garchomp was one of the single best Pokemon due to its high base speed, great overall bulk, and powerful Z-ground attack. But Garchomp had trouble against the Fairy-type Pokemon that plagued the format. Now, the only weakness that all 3 Tapus shared was Poison, but pairing a Poison type with Garchomp was risky because if Garchomp ever wanted to use Earthquake, that would be the end. Unless, of course, there was a Poison type that was immune to Ground-type attacks. See where this is going? An Australian player won a regional championship with Haunter, and like Pikachu, it also didn't hold the Eviolite item. Giving Haunter an Eviolite is like trying to do a proposal with a ring pop. It doesn't work, and you've wasted a precious stone. I value ring pops a lot. Do they know what the ring pops are? Are those still around? Let me know in the comments. I don't actually care that much, but you can let me know. I don't care. The Focus Sash item was a much better option, as it always allowed Haunter to survive one single attack. And Haunter's only got 15 less special attack than its evolution, meaning that it's still more than capable of dealing with the various Tapus running around, especially Tapu Koko, who just gets straight up KO'd by Sludge Bomb. The combination of ground and poison type damage was a force to be reckoned with in the early days of Sun and Moon, and it was only made possible thanks to the Levitate ability, graciously allowed to remain on Gengar's pre-evolutions. But Haunter is not the only bizarre pre-evolution that won a regional championship. While Pikachu and Haunter might be capable of getting great results, the vast majority of not fully evolved Pokemon gets easily overwhelmed in tournaments. And you know, tournaments can be kind of overwhelming for me too. The venues are always loud and bright, so playing the best that I can isn't always easy. It's okay, Caterpie, you're not alone.
The light.
Thankfully, blocking out noise gets a lot easier with a great pair of headphones. That's why this video is sponsored by Raycon. Wait, I'm talking, right? I can't hear anything. The noise canceling is so good. Their everyday headphones come with active noise cancellation, which can be a huge deal breaker in loud environments like tournaments. Being able to block out the hustle and bustle of the venue and just really lock in and focus on me, my thoughts, and my battle theme of choice allows me to really focus and get the results I can be proud of. Their headphones are genuinely affordable too, which is always appreciated, especially because traveling to tournaments can be kind of expensive. Go to buyraycon.com/wolfey20 where all headphones are 20% off. That's right, all headphones are 20% off on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/wolfey20. The number 8 slot on our list goes to Cottonee. Cottonee is inferior to Whimsicott in almost every way. Its bulk is only just barely better with an Eviolite, which basically means that you're giving up your item for nothing except a slightly worse move pool and no offensive presence. Oh yeah, and also a worse speed stat. There's absolutely no reason to use Cottonee unless you really need that sliver of extra bulk. Now, back in the final year of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you would normally just slap a Focus Sash on your Whimsicott and not worry about its bulk beyond that. Another reason to never consider Cottonee. There was no Covert Cloak back then, which is the main other item you see on Whimsicott nowadays. So it was kind of Focus Sash or nothing. But what happens if another Pokemon in your team really needs the Focus Sash and you really need the value that Whimsicott provides? Well, I guess the only answer is you try out Cottonee. With Eviolite providing that tiny bit of extra bulk, it barely lets Cottonee survive a very important set of attacks in the 2016 metagame. On the physical side, it could tank a Talonflame Brave Bird or a Mega Kangaskhan Double Edge. On the special side, it could survive some of the strongest moves in the format, including a Geomancy boosted Xerneas Dazzling Gleam or a Mega Salamence Hyper Voice. Whimsicott without Focus Sash could live either the attacks on the physical side or the special side, but not both. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds really good. Surely Cottonee picked up in usage after this win, right? No, they didn't. And that's because normally Focus Sash does the exact same thing and you can't get screwed over by an unlucky critical hit. But I think that team building solutions like Cottonee are really cool. It didn't pick up in general after the win because Sash Whimsicott is just better in most cases, but the key word there is most. Sometimes a Pokemon that isn't optimal in general is exactly what your team might need. Just a reminder, please check and see if you're subscribed. Lots of people think they're subscribed when they actually aren't, and subscribing is a good way to tell YouTube that you still want to see my videos when the algorithm inevitably goes a little wonky and it stops recommending them. Also, if you're enjoying this video in particular, I often use sub numbers to determine how much people are like enjoying different topics. So if you'd like to see more videos just like this one, subscribing is a great way to tell me and the rest of the team that, yeah, that's something you care about. Cottonee was a solution to a very specific set of team building constraints. The number 7 slot on our list goes to Eevee, who was the whole problem all by itself. I say was because Eevee's only been relevant once in the history of the game, but in that 1 year, it was no supporting player, no lesser version of its evolutions. It was a star in the spotlight, befitting the series' unofficial second mascot. Much like its partner Pikachu, Eevee owes its success to its VIP status. Eevee is, when you think about it, the Nepo baby of Pokemon. It can take any career path it wants, walk any path, because it's set up for life just from its special privilege. When you meet Eevee, you think, wow, it does so many things. What a truly renaissance Pokemon. And then you learn that Daddy Game Freak's been funding its life the whole time. That privilege has taken multiple forms over the years, but only one was competitively relevant. In Sun and Moon, Eevee's parents gifted it a rare and valuable stone, Eevee-Z, which transformed its attack last resort into the exclusive move Extreme Evo Boost, which does 2 things. 1, it plays an excruciatingly long animation that forces you to watch as all of Eevee's rich family members give it gifts. 2, those gifts give it +2 to every stat, effectively doubling them. Also, we can't show it here because the secret third thing it does is copyright claim any video that plays it. Of course, no amount of boosting can make Eevee strong. Even doubling every one of its stats isn't enough. So instead, it baton passes those stats to somebody else, giving every one of the boosts that it didn't work so hard to earn to its choice of very scary sweepers. Most commonly, Power Trip Crocodile or Stored Power Espeon. These 2 moves do more damage the more the user's stats are boosted. In other words, after getting the baton, they'll KO anything that they hit. See, this is what happens when we put someone with no qualifications in charge. Eevee players tended to be very devoted to making the strategy work, to the point that some players used it for the entire season, including this channel's very own editor, Geo. In general, the strategy revolved around Eevee, a sweeper or 2, and a bunch of support Pokemon like Smeargle and Clefairy, with different players favoring different supports that each offered a different way of protecting Eevee while it pranced around. Now, Eevee certainly wasn't a dominant strategy in Sun and Moon, but it was one that you always had to be prepared for thanks to its faithful devotees. That's not how you're supposed to say that, but I don't know how to. Devotees? Devotees? You know what I mean. People who are devoted to it. And Eevee actually even won a regional. Eevee could totally take over games if you were unprepared, and teams without an explicit way to remove the stat boost would be sweating when the little weasel showed up. Eevee was a flash in the pan to be sure. It didn't make any great moves at Worlds, and it only saw one good placement the following year when the more powerful Pokemon were added in, but it did place its outsized influence on the game while it was around. And for that, it's earned its spot on this list. Who knows? Maybe next generation's mechanic, its parents decide to buy its way to the top again when they introduce Calyrex Fluff Rider. This next Pokemon may not have ever won a regional, but it's got something arguably better. It has the best placement at the World Championships of any not fully evolved Pokemon ever. That's because in the final year of Black 2 and White 2, Rhydon placed top 4 at the Pokemon World Championships. The World's team that used Rhydon centered around 3 Pokemon: Jellicent, Scrafty, and Abomasnow. These 3 Pokemon formed the Trick Room core that the team would use against faster-paced teams. But the player who used Rhydon didn't want to go all in on Trick Room. He was determined to use fast Pokemon on the other side of the team, giving him flexibility to switch up his game plans as the matches called for them. As such, he was scared of Thunder Wave spam slowing down the fast side of his team, which might not seem scary to players beginning their journey in Scarlet and Violet, but back in Black and White, the king of the game was Thundurus, before it was nerfed into the ground and paralysis alongside with it. Nearly every team had a Thundurus, and Thunder Wave was its main weapon of choice. Rhydon, when you look at it, slots in as an absolutely perfect pick for his team. It could work as both a Trick Room attacker and as a team-wide Thunder Wave immunity thanks to its Lightning Rod ability. With Lightning Rod, you've got protection both from Thunder Wave and any stray electric moves targeting Jellicent. Rhydon easily switches into flying moves targeting Scrafty and Abomasnow, and it has other great synergy with Abomasnow too, with Abomasnow resisting the grass, ground, and water moves that Rhydon is afraid of. Rhydon usually started the battle hidden in the back, only switching in when it could either sponge a hit or redirect an electric move. But Rhydon still got a pretty beastly attack stat. With Rock Slide and Drill Run, it could do good damage, and it also used a sneaky move to take advantage of its offensive presence, Substitute. Back in the days before tournaments were played using open team sheets where you can see the moves of the opponent before the battle, this was a huge surprise. It allowed Rhydon to exploit the turns of opponents switching or protecting to stall out the Trick Room by setting up your own little mini Rhydon in front of the bigger Rhydon, remaining an offensive threat even in the normal dimensions. Untwisted dimensions? The fact that Rhydon placed 4th at the World Championships feels like it should be enough to qualify Rhydon for the best not fully evolved Pokemon ever. So how is it outside the top 5? The answer is that while Rhydon has the highest peak, it just doesn't have the same breadth of usage. Rhydon has inspired a few other players over the years to try it out as a shield for their electric weak Pokemon, and this was especially prevalent in the years when Charizard Y dominated the game during Sun and Moon. But by and large, it just hasn't been in the conversation. And for me, filling a niche really well at just the right moment, it is impressive, but being able to keep up even when the game changes is what really indicates greatness. Each of the top 5 Pokemon have an impressive resume, stretching over multiple years. They struggle to fit all their accolades on one page, a problem that I did not have when I worked in the corporate world. These Pokemon have got their LinkedIns filled out. They're applying to senior positions. When they walk into the interview, they get hired as the CEO, or in this next Pokemon's case, maybe just as the boss. Honchkrow may be the head honcho, but when it comes to competitive Pokemon, the little crow is the big boss. Murkrow is another example of a pre-evolution accomplishing something that its evolution just can't. And just like Haunter, it's because of a lost ability. Honchkrow, you got Moxie, see? But you just don't have the cunning trickery. That was supposed to be like a New York gangster accent, but I feel like I ended up in Pirate Zone. Murkrow has the good fortune to be one of the only Pokemon gifted the combination of Prankster and Tailwind, just like Cottonee. Prankster allows all non-damaging moves to move first, and Tailwind is one of the best non-damaging moves, doubling your team's speed stats for a whopping 4 turns. Murkrow's more notorious than Cottonee for 2 reasons. First, it's got an actual way of dealing damage thanks to foul play, meaning it isn't just a dead support slot on the board. Second comes down to something a bit more complex. Availability. See, Murkrow's managed to sneak its way into 2 early regional Pokedexes, specifically in the Alola and Paldea regions. In competitive play, when a new game releases, at first, only the Pokemon catchable in the base game without any legendaries are allowed in play. These formats have lower power levels and are much more limited. And in these limited formats, Murkrow is one of the only Prankster Tailwind setters available. Putting it a bit more bluntly, Murkrow actually took out the competition so that it could succeed, which is a very in-character move. In early Sun and Moon, Murkrow still struggled a bit with competition from Pokemon like Mandibuzz, as well as the fact that Tailwind simply wasn't a dominant strategy. Despite that, it's still placed in the top cut of several regionals, normally paired with a ground-type Earthquake user like Garchomp, or an all-out attacker like Xurkitree or Porygon Z. Its first regional win, funnily enough, didn't come until Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, when it was used on a team with unusual Pokemon like Megalophony, Xerneas, and Necrozma Duskmane to take home the gold at Bristol Regionals. But in the early days of Scarlet and Violet, there was a murder of Murkrow on the loose. Everything about the first metagame seemed designed to let Murkrow succeed. On top of being one of the only Prankster Tailwind setters, it offered weather control, taunt to shut down opposing setup, and most of all, Haze. Haze is usually a pretty good move. It removes all stat boosts and drops on the field, setting everything back to neutral. When Dondozo is around, Haze becomes an absolutely essential move. Playing the first format of Scarlet and Violet without a way to answer Dondozo was asking to lose not only the battle, but at least some of your hair. Murkrow offered incredible roll compression as a way to handle Dondozo and to facilitate your own team at the same time. Most often, you'd see it paired with Gholdengo, who not only appreciated Tailwind support, allowing it to outspeed its main counters like Garchomp and Hydreigon, but it could also take advantage of Haze, as Gholdengo's signature move, Make It Rain, lowers its special attack stat. Now, Gholdengo's ability is supposed to make it immune to all moves that don't do damage, but for some reason, Haze was excluded. I think about this every time my Perish Song fails on Gholdengo, and Perish Song has the same targeting rules as Haze. Murkrow eventually fell out of favor as more and more Pokemon got introduced, and we've only heard the odd Squawk recently. On its own, Murkrow probably isn't a as strong as some of the other Pokemon on this list. But we don't play Pokemon in a vacuum, and until I see a Rhydon take out Dondozo, Murkrow's staying in the top 5. The number 4 slot in our list is Dusclops. Dusclops is like the other side of Murkrow's coin. Murkrow uses an ability that its evolution doesn't have to speed things up. Eviolite Dusclops is purely a bulkier version of Dusknoir that slows things down. Unlike Murkrow, Dusclops really does have some impressive bulk going for it, which, along with an immunity to Fake Out, almost guarantees it can set up Trick Room against anything but the most offensive team compositions. Like Murkrow, Dusclops uses non-traditional attacking moves to have some presence on the field, like Nightshade. Although with Will-O-Wisp and Ally Switch also available, Dusclops has multiple ways to annoy your opponent. Dusclops has access to Recovery and Pain Split, and like Murkrow, Dusclops has been strongest early on in the meta of a generation, where its competition isn't quite as fierce. Unlike Murkrow, however, Dusclops has left its mark 2 generations in a row. In early Sword and Shield, Dusclops was the Trick Room setter to beat. It was impossible to stop it from setting up Trick Room, it could do decent damage with Nightshade, Will-O-Wisp could slow down physical attackers, but there was one other unassuming move that most Dusclops ran. Bulldoze. This is because Dusclops' most common partner by far was the grown-up version of one of our previous entries, Weakness Policy Rhyperior, who, after Dynamaxing, would take the Bulldoze, take no damage because Dusclops is not very strong and Bulldoze is very weak, activate the Weakness Policy, and suddenly have double HP, double attack, and an ability that weakened all incoming super effective moves. And even if your Pokemon managed to survive a hit, you would still have to worry about Dusclops' support. Physical attackers could be burnt, and special attackers always had to worry about Ally Switch. I'm speaking from experience actually. I used this strategy as part of my 2nd place regional team in the beginning of Sword and Shield, although I was far from the only person to use it. This thing was popular. It won Malmo Regionals a week later with the same combo, and even after Rhyperior fell out of favor, Dusclops saw some continued usage alongside Trick Room staples like Torkoal. Even after fading away during the 2nd year of Sword and Shield, it came back in the final year to support Calyrex Ice Rider, and last year in Scarlet and Violet, a few players used it as their Trick Room setter of choice alongside both Ursaluna forms. Dusclops places higher than Murkrow because it's just had more success, and in my opinion, that's just because it's a better Pokemon. In addition to its higher bulk, its support moves are more impactful in more situations. Both Pokemon excelled because they were hard for popular Pokemon to deal with, and they did something strong. Now we get into our top 3. The Pokemon with results so strong or abilities so game warping that they can't be beat. But actually, before we get to the Hall of Fame, we gotta talk about the honorable mentions. You love the honorable mentions. These are Pokemon where, yeah, they maybe have a good placement or two, but they're mostly here because I think they're funny and I want to talk about them. Prinplup made it past the first day of competition earlier this year at a European regional, allegedly as a Sneasler counter. With Eviolite, it's a lot bulkier and it's not weak to fighting types, meaning it can take 2 close combats. Unfortunately, it's still Prinplup. My understanding is that the person who used this only brought it to 1 match and they lost that match, so I maybe shouldn't have mentioned it, but you know what, never mind, let's just move on. A few of these Pokemon fit in the same box labeled Eviolite is broken. Basically, they do what their evolution does, but with a bit more bulk. That applies to Chansey, who's only ever been used on stall teams, and Mischievous, who actually got 2nd at US Nationals in 2013 as a Will-O-Wisp support mon. It's also the case for the very thirsty Laleep I used to get 9th at regionals in 2013. Technically, Cradily would have been better here, but I thought that Laleep was a lot funnier, so I chose to use it. 2013 was my worst season ever. I didn't think it was fair to mention Pokemon that were used before they got evolutions, like specifically Bisharp and Duraludon. These Pokemon have really seen no usage since they got their evolutions and saw a decent bit of usage before then, but they weren't not fully evolved then, so I'm not mentioning them here. Well, I guess I am mentioning them here, but you get what I'm saying. There are a few other unevolved Pokemon that have made use of their specific stats to do things that their grown-up versions can't. For example, during Sword and Shield, some players used Slowpoke Surf to activate their own Torkoal's weakness policy inside of Trick Room, similar to the Rhyperior strategy, but funnier. Slowpoke was used because, for maybe the only time in history, both Slowking and Slowbro were too fast. Torracat was sometimes used because it was faster than Incineroar, though it's actually less bulky even with an Eviolite. The last 2 honorable mentions though don't just use different stat spreads, they do something their evolutions literally can't. The first is Yanma. See, when Yanma evolves and its goggles go combat mode, it trades in Compound Eyes for Tinted Lens, which is a great ability in its own right, but Compound Eyes turns Yanma's normally 60% accurate Hypnosis into a terrifying 78% accurate move, and it can also use Tailwind. This saw some play earlier this year. The other Pokemon I want to talk about is Aaron. Not Aaron Cybertron Zang, just Aaron. Specifically, a level 1 Aaron. Do you feel fear? The long and the short of it, and Aaron is very short, is that this Aaron is immortal. See, Aaron's got Focus Sash built in via the Sturdy ability, except it's better. The way that Sturdy works is that whenever you're at full HP and you take an attack that would knock you out, it lets you survive with 1 HP remaining. Combine this with the Shell Ball item, which heals based on how much damage you do, and Endeavor, which just takes the target down to your current HP stat. Aaron can repeatedly take opponents that damage it down to 1 HP, healing the health back with Shell Bell, in which case Sturdy is then active again, and allow the Sandstorm to knock out any Pokemon that was hit. I brought the strategy to a regional back in Black and White 2, and I actually finished 9th. The reason that I lost is because I didn't know that the Mold Breaker ability ignored Sturdy. The strategy is no longer usable because now all Pokemon are automatically set to level 50 in official tournaments. I do not know if my Aaron was part of the reason for that ruling changing. Anyway, those are the runner-ups. Let's move on to the big dogs. And while technically we're on to the top 3, well, our top 3 slot is a shared slot, Magmar and Electabuzz. That's because these two adoptive brothers are here for the exact same reason, basically to do the same thing and have very similar results. Each of our past few Pokemon have revolved around a single move that's a competitive staple. Murkrow used its unevolved status to set Tailwind, Dusclops used it to set Trick Room, and these two use it for one of the most useless moves in single battles, Follow Me. Follow Me is one of the most broken moves in competitive play, forcing your opponents to target the user. It's the reason that Pachirisu famously won Worlds, and it's what makes Magmar and Electabuzz relevant. In keeping with their status as counterparts, these two are about as similar as two Pokemon with different typings can be. They have identical bulk. Electabuzz is a bit faster at the cost of some attacking power, and crucially, they both have access to Vital Spirit. This ability prevents the user from falling asleep in pretty much any context. Vital Spirit makes these two Pokemon some of the best anti-sleep Pokemon in the game. And when I say anti-sleep, I really mean anti-Amoonguss. That's how Sajin Park used Magmar. Back before Pachirisu, he used a Magmar team to place 5th at the 2013 World Championships, just one placement under Rhydon. His Magmar was tricked out with Overheat, Will-O-Wisp, and Helping Hand, making it a powerful fungal deterrent who could also support Sajin's other Pokemon. And then, no one used Magmar for literally 11 years. Electabuzz? Nowhere to be seen. But just a few months ago, both of them started cropping up as a result of a major buff that they received, Follow Me. Wait, didn't they already have Follow Me? Well, yes and no. After Black and White ended, the rules changed, and Pokemon were no longer allowed to use moves that they could only get from other games. Magmar and Electabuzz learned Follow Me as a special move in the spin-off game Pokemon XD, but nowhere else. However, in Scarlet and Violet, they returned, and for the first time in 11 years, Follow Me was added to their natural move pool. With only a few other Pokemon available for redirection, these two could finally rise to the top, especially because they exist as direct counters to the best other redirector in the format, Amoonguss. Basically, you can use these Pokemon when your team already wants a grass type for something else and can't afford to use Amoonguss, or when you want a Pokemon that offers other types of support. They can't put their foes to sleep, but both Magmar and Electabuzz can use Helping Hand to boost your team's damage output. And Electabuzz became the more popular of the two because it can also use the speed control move Electroweb for both a little bit of damage and even more support. While neither of these Pokemon have the same depth of results as Murkrow or Dusclops, they have become extremely prevalent in the current format, and Magmar got 5th at Worlds back in Black and White. I personally suspect that going forward, we'll be seeing a lot more of these two than we did over the past 11 years. The number 2 Pokemon on our list has never cracked a World's top 8, but it is indisputably stronger than both Magmar and Electabuzz. This Pokemon has a power all its own, one that stands side by side with the most powerful Pokemon ever created, facilitating their wrath and destruction. And while other Pokemon on this list might sometimes be lesser versions of other picks, this Pokemon does its job better than any other pretender. It's Clefairy. Clefairy is one of only 9 Pokemon ever to get the ability Friendguard. Now notice I didn't say one of 9 viable Pokemon or fully evolved Pokemon. All of these other Pokemon suck. except for Mousehold. Now, I have used Jigglypuff before, but I don't want to talk about it. When it comes to using Friend Guard, Clefairy can't be beat. Friend Guard is one of the most broken abilities that Game Freak has ever created, which partially explains why so few Pokemon have gotten it. A Pokemon with Friend Guard passively reduces the damage to its partner Pokemon by 25% just for being on the field. And when it comes to using Friend Guard, no one does it better than Clefairy. Both it and Mousehold have access to Follow Me and Helping Hand, but Mouseholds can't hold the Eviolite, making it far less bulky. Mousehold's main advantage is its speed, but both Follow Me and Helping Hand have priority anyway, making this somewhat of a null point. Clefairy, on the other hand, has better bulk, a way better fairy typing, and access to better support moves like Life Dew, Heal Pulse, Icy Wind, and Sing. Clefairy's low speed stat actually works as an advantage that can benefit its team, and that's because of one very specific move, After You. This move makes your target go immediately after you do, no matter how fast they would otherwise be. And what that means is that even in Trick Room, Clefairy can let its partner move earlier thanks to its own terrible speed. That's how most people used Clefairy earlier this year, when it became one of the most popular partners for Calyrex Shadow. I was actually one of the few Calyrex Shadow teams at Worlds that didn't have Clefairy. Most of them did, including one in the top 16 and 5 more in the top 64. Clefairy and Calyrex even won 2 regionals a few months before Worlds, in Bologna and Los Angeles. Unlike some of the other Pokemon on the list though, Clefairy hasn't only been relevant for one metagame or for a single format. Funnily enough, for such a little Pokemon, it tends to perform best in the presence of giants. Players have used Clefairy in every restricted metagame because Friend Guard offers such a huge boost to your already huge Pokemon. You can use it to support Groudon, Xerneas, Kyogre, Calyrex. Even non-restricted Pokemon like Kingambit and Goldengo have benefited from Clefairy's friendly aura. Every generation since X and Y, players have used Clefairy to good success. And that's because Clefairy is totally unique. Pretty much no other Pokemon can sit in the field and just cut damage to its partner. Or rather, the other ones that can simply can't match up to Clefairy. It's the rare, unevolved Pokemon that sits at the peak above its competitors, evolved or otherwise. Only one other not fully evolved Pokemon has better results. Ready to hear about it? Porygon 2 is, no reservations, no holds barred, one of the best Trick Room setters in VGC history. Heck, it might be one of the best Pokemon period in VGC history. Its combination of bulk, longevity, offensive presence, and disruption are on par with any Pokemon to ever set Trick Room, outside of maybe Cresselia, and the results back it up. Remember when I said that Rhydon was the highest placing not fully evolved Pokemon at Worlds ever? Well, that's still technically true because it's tied with Porygon 2, who took home a 4th place of its own in 2023. On top of its World's top 4, Porygon 2 has dozens of regional and special event first places to its name, as well as 2 international titles. It's almost won every single level of competitive Pokemon tournament. Wait, don't I know somebody who did that? So, what makes Porygon 2 so good? Well, in addition to its phenomenal bulk, it's phenomenally versatile. Let's not forget that Porygon 2's highest stat is still its special attack before the Eviolite, and it has 2 abilities that can power up its attack stat in download and analytic. Even if you don't train it in its special attack stat, Porygon 2 puts out enough damage that you really can't just ignore it and let it sit in the field forever. Its coverage is also really hard to deal with. Between Tri-Attack, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam, it's just really difficult to ignore. And it's not a Pokemon you can just chip down over time either, thanks to its amazing recovery with the move, well, Recover. The main reason to use Porygon 2 though is of course the fact that it gets access to Trick Room, one of the best speed control moves in the game. It has other speed control moves as well, like Electroweb, Icy Wind, and I guess you could use Thunder Wave as well, but normally it's a Trick Room attacker. One year in particular, Porygon 2 was so popular that they started running Toxic as a counter to, well, other Porygon 2. Porygon 2 is actually so strong that it's one of the only non-restricted Pokemon to have ever been banned from competitive play. In one of Sword and Shield's rule sets, the top 10 most used Pokemon from the previous season were temporarily banned from competition. Porygon 2 was one of those unlucky 10. Although looking back, I'm sure it doesn't feel too bad about the shout out. There have been times where Porygon 2 is not the best Trick Room setter available. It's even been outclassed by Dusclops before, sitting 3 entries lower. But what makes Porygon 2 the indisputable greatest not fully evolved Pokemon of all time is its remarkable consistency. When you're building a team structured around Trick Room, Porygon 2 is always going to get a look. I think one thing that really backs this up is that for every other Pokemon on this list, I've had to justify reasons why it can hang with the big dog. underdogs. Either it was a niche strategy, or it made use of limited availability, or the stars aligned just perfectly for it to pop off. It's like I feel like I have to prove to you that, yeah, not fully evolved Pokemon can still be good. But Porygon 2? It's got nothing to prove. Porygon 2 is the best not fully evolved Pokemon ever, and there is no competition. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you might like the one where I ranked every single pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Fair warning, you might get a little whiplash because, I mean, we've been talking about Pokemon like Haunter and Rhydon, and over there we're talking about like Tyranitar and Garchomp and Metagross, so yeah, it's a bit of a shift.